nothing has sense and there is no meaning in life. These are statements commonly associated with nihilism, and surely they sound very pessimistic. Nietzsche's philosophy is often linked to such claims, but the truth is much more complex than you think. Friedrich Nietzsche is one of the most fascinating and controversial figures in the history of philosophy. He is known for provocative ideas like God is dead, the concept of the Übermensch, and, most naturalistically, nihilism. Nietzsche is often portrayed as a nihilist, someone who believed life has no meaning or purpose, and many did claim that on purpose to discredit his ideas. But what if I told you that Nietzsche's philosophy is actually optimistic? In today's video we'll explore what nihilism really means, how it shows up in Nietzsche's work, and ultimately answer the question, was Nietzsche actually a nihilist? So, let's get started. Definition of nihilism. Before we dive in Nietzsche's philosophy, we need to define what nihilism really means. The term nihilism comes from the Latin word nihil, meaning nothing. It's often described as the belief that life has no inherent meaning, purpose, or value. A nihilist classically rejects all religious and moral principles, often concluding that nothing truly matters. That's why the Latin term nihil suits this concept so much. However, nihilism isn't a single monolithic idea. There are different kinds of nihilism, each with its own focus and implications. So let's briefly outline the main types of nihilism. We have moral nihilism, so the view that there are no objective moral values, meaning the concepts like good and evil are entirely human constructions. Nietzsche critiqued traditional morality, especially Christian ethics, for imposing arbitrary values that suppressed human potential. But as we will see, Nietzsche didn't want to throw away morality entirely. He wanted to redefine it. And the next type is existential nihilism. And this form of nihilism argues that life itself has no inherent meaning or purpose. In a godless universe where traditional values have collapsed, humans might feel adrift. This is the kind of nihilism people often associate with Nietzsche, especially with his famous proclamation that God is dead. But was Nietzsche really an existential nihilist? Or he was responding to the crisis of meaning that arises when old certainties fade away. Nextly, we have epistemological nihilism, episteme meaning knowledge in ancient Greek. And this branch of nihilism questions whether we can know anything with certainty. Nietzsche was skeptical of the idea that there is any absolute objective truth. He was actually a truth relativist, arguing that what we consider truth is often a product of cultural, historical, and psychological influences. As he famously stated, there are no facts, only interpretations. And this skepticism about the existence of objective truth would later influence philosophers like, for example, Michel Foucault, and inspire developments in postmodern thoughts. Political nihilism. So in the 19th century, nihilism wasn't just a philosophical idea. It was also a political and cultural force, particularly in Russia. Political nihilists rejected all traditional institutions, authority, and social structures. So Nietzsche wasn't really a political nihilist, but he understood how the collapse of traditional values could lead to widespread disillusionment and rebellion. So nihilism is far from being just a one thing. For some, it's a rejection of meaning. For others, it's a psychological response to the uncertainties of life. And for Nietzsche, nihilism represented a profound crisis. A crisis of values, meaning, and knowledge in the wake of the decline of religion and traditional values. And at this point it might be useful to consider Nietzsche's definition of nihilism. In his work The Will to Power, he writes, "A nihilist is a man who judges of the world as it is that it ought not to be, and of the world as it ought to be that it doesn't exist. According to this view, our existence, so action, suffering, willing, feeling, has no meaning. The pathos of in vain is a nihilist pathos at the same time. As pathos, an inconsistency on the part of the nihilists." So Nietzsche points out that nihilism is self-contradictory. Nihilists claims that life has no inherent meaning, yet they suffer and feel anguish about this lack of meaning. But this very suffering reveals that they still long for meaning, even though they insist it doesn't exist. In other words, by caring so deeply about the absence of meaning, nihilists show that they haven't truly rejected it. They are still emotionally attached to the idea of meaning. Nihilism in Nietzsche's philosophy. So how does nihilism factor into Nietzsche's philosophy? This is where things get interesting. Nietzsche wasn't just interested in nihilism as a concept. He saw it as a profound and growing problem in modern European society, especially as Christianity and traditional morality began to lose their influence. When Nietzsche declared God is dead, he wasn't simply announcing the end of belief in God. He was making much broader and more unsettling claim about the collapse of cultural and moral foundations of Western civilization. For centuries, Christian values has provided people with a sense of meaning, finding what was right and wrong, good and evil. But as a society became more secular and scientific, those values began to lose their authority. Nietzsche believed that without God or any higher moral authority, people would eventually fall into nihilism. In The Gay Science, Nietzsche famously wrote, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves? The murderers of all murderers. What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves?" This is of course a fragment of a very famous passage from Gay Science called The Madman. And this wasn't just about the decline of religion, it was about the unraveling of the whole system of meaning. Nietzsche saw nihilism as the natural consequence of this unrevealing. As traditional values broke down, people were left without a clear moral compass, drifting in a world that seemed increasingly chaotic and meaningless. But Nietzsche didn't celebrate this development. Far from it. He was deeply concerned about the consequences. What would replace these traditional values? How would people find meaning in a world where the old answers no longer applied? And he called this the crisis of nihilism. For Nietzsche, nihilism wasn't just an abstract intellectual stance. It was an existential condition with dangerous emotional and psychological consequences. When people realize there is no inherent meaning or purpose to life, they might respond with despair, resignation, or even distraction. This is what Nietzsche refers to as passive nihilism, a state where people accept the meaningless of life and stop trying to create meaning for themselves. But here's the crucial point. Nietzsche was not a nihilist. He didn't see nihilism as the end of the story. In fact, he believed that nihilism is something that we have to overcome. He saw the collapse of traditional values not as a catastrophe, but as an opportunity for a new beginning. Rather than passively accepting meaninglessness, Nietzsche wanted us to confront this crisis and use it as a springboard to create our own values and live life on our own terms. And this is what Nietzsche called active nihilism, a rejection of old, outdated values, but with the intention of building something new, powerful and life-affirming in their place. Nietzsche's philosophy then wasn't about despair, it was about embracing life, with all its struggles and complexities, with finding ways to make it meaningful again. Was Nietzsche a nihilist? So, was Nietzsche a nihilist? Technically, the answer is no. We could name him an active nihilist, but it's not really a nihilist in a classical sense, as is a person that creates new values. So it's a next step after nihilism. So he dealt extensively with the problem of nihilism and recognized its presence in the modern world. Actually, for the majority of his life, he was fighting with nihilism. Therefore, naming him a nihilist is far from being correct. His goal was never to lead people into despair. In fact, he warned about the dangers of nihilism and the temptation to fall into what he called decadence, a kind of surrender to weakness, resignation and meaninglessness. Instead, Nietzsche's philosophy is all about overcoming nihilism. He believed that while old values crumble, it creates an opportunity for us to rise above nihilism and create new values, new meanings. For Nietzsche, this was a deeply empowering idea. He wanted people to affirm life with all its struggles and imperfections, to face the world bravely, without relying on metaphysical or religious crutches, and to create their own path. Yet many of Nietzsche's critics, especially those in Christian circles, preferred to portray him as a nihilist, and this was no accident. Nietzsche's critique of Christianity, particularly in works like The Antichrist, make him a target for those who felt he was attacking the moral fabric of society. For centuries, Christianity was the dominant moral authority in the West, and Nietzsche's rejection of Christian values was seen as dangerous and subversive. Some Christians painted Nietzsche as a nihilist, and not because they misunderstood him, but because they wanted to warn people about the dangers of his philosophy. In their view, his ideas represented a rejection of all moral values, a descent into chaos. But this was a misrepresentation of Nietzsche's true intent. He didn't want to destroy morality for its own sake. He wanted to replace old, decaying values with life-affirming ones. His philosophy is ultimately about saying yes to life in its raw, unfiltered form. It's about embracing suffering, struggle, uncertainty, and turning those experiences into sources of personal growth and strength. So, was Nietzsche a nihilist? Absolutely not. He might be considered a nihilist if we name him an active nihilist, but it has a completely different meaning, because an active nihilist is a person that overcomes nihilism. Nietzsche was a philosopher that recognized the dangers of nihilism, and his philosophy is ultimately a positive one, a philosophy of affirmation, when we don't turn away from life's challenges, but embrace them as possibilities to grow and evolve. Nietzsche's work laid the groundwork for many 20th century thinkers, particularly in the fields of existentialism and psychoanalysis. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus were directly influenced by Nietzsche's exploration of meaning in a godless world. Nietzsche also inspired major figures in psychology, including Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. Jung's ideas about the shadow and Freud's work on the unconscious both reflect Nietzsche's understanding of the deeper, often hidden, forces that drive human behavior. His insight into the human condition was profound and continues to resonate today. In the end, Nietzsche's philosophy challenges us to face the void of meaning head-on, but instead of falling into despair, he asks us to create, to live fully, and to affirm life. He's not a nihilist, but a thinker that saw a potential for greatness in every human being, if only we have the courage to rise above the nihilism. Alrighty, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can leave me a like and a subscription if you want to see more content like this in the future. If you have any questions, doubts, comments, you can use the comment section below. Thank you once again, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.